My daughter-in-law said to me, "You old witch, I only put up with you because of my husband." Then he saw my name engraved on the deed. "I only put up with you because of my husband, you old witch." That's what my daughter-in-law said, in front of more than a dozen people, right in the middle of our Thanksgiving dinner. No one reacted. No one defended me. Not even my son. He just lowered his head, as if it were normal, as if that kind of cruelty belonged at the table. I stood there, still holding the pecan pie I'd spent all morning baking. No one touched it. And you know what hurts the most? I wasn't even surprised. I had seen it coming for a long time. They just finally said it out loud that day. And that was also the day I knew I couldn't go on living like a shadow in the very house I helped build. My name is Celeste Winrow. I'm 72 years old. I taught elementary school for over 30 years in Brunswick, Maine. I've been a widow for 12, and for the past 3 years, I've lived with my son Mason and his wife Bevan in the home I sold everything I had to help create. If you're a mother, a grandmother, who's cooked hundreds of meals no one remembers, who's quietly cleaned up after every gathering without a thank you, or who's heard words like knives from the very people you once cradled in your arms, then I hope you'll stay a few moments and hear this story. It's not a complaint, and it's not an accusation. It's simply the journey of a woman who once believed that love was enough until she realized sometimes silence isn't patience. It's erasure. I live in the very house I helped pay for, yet every step I take feels like I'm intruding. My heels make the faintest sound against the polished wooden floor, but still, Bevan shoots me a sideways glance from the kitchen, as if I'd just dropped a pot. She's standing at the new counter, holding a pale gray container, eyes locked on a list open on her iPad. I slow my pace. Not because I'm tired, but because I don't want to make another sound. "This Japanese tea set, maybe it's time to toss it," she says, almost to herself, but loud enough for the whole house to hear. "That was," I begin softly. "Oh, I thought it was too old. And with the house's new color palette, it just doesn't fit anymore." I swallow hard. That tea set was something I bought in my first year of teaching, with my first real paycheck. I say nothing. Just watch as Bevan slides the whole set into a cardboard box, stuffing newspaper around it. Mason walks in through the garage, car keys still in hand. He glances at the box, then at me, with a look that seems to say, "What now?" I don't blame him. Mason's never been good with conflict. He gives me a half-hearted hug and asks, "You okay, Mom?" I nod. He scratches his head, eyes darting toward the kitchen, where Bevan is mixing something in a large bowl. "I'll talk to Bevan about the teapot." "No need, honey. It's not important." But inside, I don't feel lighter, because I know he won't say anything at all. October afternoons in Maine start to chill early. Maple leaves scatter across the front yard, a tangle of red, orange, and yellow, like a painting that spilled its colors by mistake. I stand by the window, lights off. The house glows in a soft, honeyed haze. It's beautiful, but cold. Then I hear the doorbell, followed by a familiar voice. "Anyone home? I brought pumpkin pie." The door opens, and with it, real warmth steps in. Loretta, my old friend from our teaching days in Portland, is the only one I still talk to. Her voice still carries, her stride still strong, even at 75. "My goodness, this new kitchen looks straight out of a magazine. But why does it feel colder than a showroom?" I laugh. Bevan pretends not to hear, busying herself. Loretta sets the pumpkin pie on the table, the scent of cinnamon and butter flooding the room. "Remember when we used to host dance classes at your old place? My feet always ached after cha-cha lessons, but I never missed a Saturday." I nod, a genuine smile blooming. Those memories feel like an old wool scarf. Frayed, but always warm. Loretta glances around, then leans in, her voice low and steady. "Don't let yourself become the old chair. Everyone sits on it, but no one bothers to dust it." I look at her, silent. But something inside me shifts. I don't yet know what, only that I feel it. That night, I sit alone upstairs in my room. The reading lamp casts a soft glow over an open book, but I can't make out a single word. Downstairs, Bevan watches a sitcom. Laughter bubbles from the TV, light and even, like it belongs to another world. I just sit there, hand resting on the third drawer of my nightstand. I pull it open gently, as if afraid even I might hear the sound. Inside, a neatly folded cream cloth. Beneath it, a white envelope, thicker than most. I lift it, fingers tracing the softened edge. It holds a copy of the house deed, the originals in a bank safe. But this one is mine. My name, Celeste Winrow, is etched in tiny, laser-cut letters at the very end of the document. Invisible, unless you know exactly where to look. No one's ever asked. No one's ever noticed. This house was built with money from the sale of my old home, the place I lived in for 30 years with my husband, where Mason grew up, where I buried my old cat, and where I first noticed my face aging in the family photos on the wall. I sold that house to help fund nearly half of this one, because Mason and Bevan said they wanted space for a family. And I thought, as long as the children are happy. I never asked for ownership. I just told the lawyer, if proof is needed, mark my name, but make it small. I don't want attention. A draft creaks the bedroom door. I rise to shut the latch. Before returning to bed, my eyes pause. On a photo hanging beside the vanity, a family picture, Mason and Bevan in the center, arms around the kids. Behind them, a golden wheat field. I'm not in it. I took that photo. I framed it. I said, 1, 2, 3, smile, and then no one asked me to join. I remember that day, not because it hurt, but because it felt like a sign, a quiet premonition, like the clink of glasses that never quite shatter, just wobble. There's a knock. Mom? Mason. I flinch, quickly sliding the deed back into the drawer and locking it. Still awake? He walks in, holding a mug of hot cocoa, the kind I used to make every winter. Now Bevan does it, for him. Just wanted to make sure everything's okay. About earlier, Bevan didn't mean anything by it. I nod. I don't want to argue. I don't have the energy. Are you upset about the tea set? I shake my head. He sits on the edge of the bed, rubbing his knee, eyes avoiding mine. Bevan's just particular. She likes everything to match. Gray tones, minimal style. You get it, right? I don't answer. Instead, I ask, do you remember that tea set? He's quiet. I know he doesn't. Back then, all he cared about was his 5th grade math test. I remember. You slipped near the fish tank. I brewed ginger tea in that pot for your stomach. He gives a faint smile. I'm sorry, Mom. I'll talk to Bevan. I nod. But I know. There won't be any talk. And I'm beginning to understand. I'm not waiting for talks anymore. The next morning, Loretta invites me to the farmer's market. I decline. I just want to stay home today. Got a few things to take care of. She looks at me like she sees through every word. If you need someone to remember who you are, I still do. And the name Celeste isn't just a mother. I walk her to the door and linger in the chilly October air, watching sunlight thread through the pines. Behind me, I hear Bevan laugh. On the phone, probably with a friend, and the words from last night echo again. You're here because of Mason. But this house belongs to us. I smile softly. No one knows I still hold a piece of paper they've never cared to see. I only put up with her because of my husband, that old witch. Bevan laughed loudly at the dinner table as she said it. The clinking of glasses stopped in an instant. The spoon in my hand slipped and tapped the edge of my plate. A soft but sharp sound. I looked up. The whole table, full of guests, seemed to freeze for a second. You might wonder why I was still surprised, after all these years living in this house. But I truly hadn't expected Thanksgiving to unravel like this. I had gotten up at 5 in the morning to roast the turkey. Bevan didn't let me handle the main course, so I took care of the pecan pie and a few side dishes. Buttered green beans, mashed potatoes with gravy. I didn't complain. I only hoped the evening would feel warm, like the early years. when Mason and Bevan didn't yet have the means for big gatherings. The table was dressed in deep red velvet, white chrysanthemums tucked among yellow maple leaves. Vintage candlesticks held cinnamon-scented candles. Everything looked beautiful, so beautiful it made you forget that not everyone was truly welcome at the table. I was washing my hands in the kitchen when I heard Bevan call out, "You already ate, right?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement, already decided. I glanced at the small plate on the counter, a tiny portion of turkey, a few slices of roasted squash. I nodded, though she hadn't waited for an answer. I sat alone at the kitchen bench, nibbling my food like a passing guest. Sometimes I imagined this house wasn't mine at all, and I was just a volunteer maid replaying old memories. Laughter drifted in from the dining room. I stepped out just as Mason raised his glass for a toast. Bevan placed her hand over his and smiled sweetly. "We're so grateful for each other, and for a modern, kind home, free from the clutter of outdated things from the past." Everyone laughed, though a few faces seemed unsure who that was aimed at. I stood a few steps behind, just out of reach, and I knew I'd just been erased from the list of things to be thankful for. I took a breath, carried the pie to the table. The scent of vanilla and toasted pecans still lingered, warm and inviting. I set it down gently, smiled at a few guests, people who nodded politely, not knowing my name. "Oh, did Mrs. Celeste make that?" one of Bevan's friends asked. Bevan glanced over quickly, then replied, as if talking about someone from another state. "Yes, my mother-in-law loves making those old-style desserts." No one touched the pie. Maybe because Bevan had already put out lemon mousse and Italian panna cotta. I turned to head back to the kitchen, then heard Bevan's giggle again. To be honest, I only tolerate her because of my husband, that old witch. I turned around. Bevan didn't look at me. She said it like a punchline to a joke, sipping her wine, laughing as if she hadn't just stepped on someone's dignity. No one laughed with her. A few guests sighed. Some avoided my eyes. Loretta, my only real friend at the table, set her glass down gently. She looked at Bevan like she might say something, then didn't. I bent down to pick up a napkin someone had dropped near a chair. It gave me a reason to bow my head, to keep them from seeing the tears stinging my eyes. I heard Mason clear his throat, but he said nothing. I stood slowly, eyes glancing past the chairs, through candlelight and crystal glasses, and landed on a quiet emptiness inside me. And I realized I had truly lost this house. Back in the kitchen, my hands trembled as I turned on the faucet. The rush of water drowned out the whispers from the living room. Bevan was telling a joke, and Mason, I knew he was avoiding looking at me. He always did that, even as a child. When he was sad, he'd sneak to the backyard and sit for hours, just listening to the crickets. As a man, he still chose silence. But now, his silence hurt. I dried my hands and turned toward the oven. One full pecan pie still sat untouched. I cut a small slice for myself. It smelled rich and buttery, the crust perfectly crisp, just like the first time I learned to bake it from my mother. She used to say, "Anyone can bake a pie, but only love makes it something people remember." Maybe I'd poured too much hope into this one. A hand touched my shoulder. I flinched. It was Loretta. "You okay?" I nodded, but said nothing. She stepped closer, looked around, then leaned toward a small drawer by the counter. "What's this?" I was surprised. That drawer usually held odds and ends. Old keychains, dried-up pens, faded notebooks. But something stuck out from under a notebook. A thick, folded document, its edges slightly yellowed. Loretta gently pulled it out, squinting to read. Then she exhaled and looked at me. "This is the deed to the house, isn't it? With your name etched at the bottom?" I nodded slowly. I had asked for my name to be laser engraved after selling my old home to help build this one. A reminder that I'd laid part of my life into every brick. But I'd never told Mason. And certainly not Bevan. I thought they didn't need to know. Or maybe I was wrong. Loretta held the paper, her hand tightening. Keep this with you, and I'm staying until the guests leave. You don't have to, Loretta. I'm used to it. Well, I'm not, and I don't want to be. She slid the document into her handbag without asking, but I understood. It was her quiet way of standing beside me, the kind of loyalty only a 70-year friendship can give. After the party, the guests left with soft footsteps, small laughter, and cheerful holiday wishes. Mason walked them out. Bevan smiled like nothing had happened. I sat in the kitchen, listening to Loretta tidy up. When the house fell quiet, I stepped into the dining room. No one had touched the pecan pie. Candles still flickered. Wine shimmered in the glasses. But I no longer looked at the table. I looked around. The sofa where I used to read. Mason's wedding photo on the wall. The beige rug Bevan had recently picked out. I stood there, scanning the room, and knew this place had never truly been my home. I washed the unused plates with trembling hands. Hot water poured over my skin, but I felt no warmth. Something inside me had gone cold. When I was younger, I taught elementary school kids how to write their first sentences. They'd ask, "Miss, can we erase if we mess up?" And I'd say, "Some mistakes you can erase, some words you can't take back." I just never imagined that in my old age, I'd be the one swallowing a word I couldn't erase at my own dinner table. Bevan never apologized. Mason never brought it up. They passed by me as if I were a piece of old furniture, kept for familiarity, not affection. I heard them laugh in the living room. Something about an upcoming vacation, a spa, Bevan retelling her funny story from the party, giggling like she hadn't said something cruel. And me, I didn't feel angry enough to shout. Truth is, I no longer had the strength for anger. What hurt was the emptiness, the sense that I had lived quietly, tried to belong here, and still never counted as part of it. I stepped out onto the back porch. The October night wind was sharp, spinning maple leaves under the soft, yellow light of the eaves. I missed my old house. Small, but every fall it smelled of damp wood and hot tea by the kitchen table. There, I was the homeowner. Here, I was just sheltering. Loretta joined me with 2 mugs of hot tea. She didn't say much. We sat together on the wooden bench in silence. Sometimes, old friendship needs no advice, just presence. "You know," Loretta said gently, "I used to think getting older made people gentler. But maybe people just get sharper when they feel like they've lost control." I turned to her. "You mean Bevan?" Loretta shrugged, took a sip. "I'm not excusing her, but I think she's afraid. Afraid your presence reminds her she's not in full control. That a woman who once had a home, a life of her own, a son, now lives here, in the middle of her house." I gave a thin smile. "So you think I should just disappear?" "I think it's time you asked yourself. If this place no longer feels like home, do you still owe it anything?" I didn't answer, but I knew that question would stay with me through the night. I didn't need them to see that I was strong. I just needed them to know I wasn't staying anymore. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up earlier than usual. The house still smelled faintly of turkey and wine from the day before, but the silence made it feel like the dinner had never even happened. I walked barefoot down the hallway. The hardwood floors were icy beneath my feet. Everything was in its place, but none of it felt like mine anymore. I left the house before Mason woke up. Carrying a small handbag, I walked the empty streets of Brunswick. The sky hung gray above me, as if everything had been dusted with cold. Leafless trees lined the sidewalks like thin arms raised in quiet surrender. I stepped into the old diner near the post office, the one Loretta and I used to visit back when life was simpler. I ordered a decaf coffee, splash of milk, no sugar. I needed a clear head. While I waited, I pulled an envelope from my bag, a folded and sealed copy of the deed I'd hidden away for years. Along the edge, laser engraved in small letters, Celeste Winrow, July 2003. Loretta arrived a few minutes later, her small frame wrapped in a snug teal knit coat. She sat across from me, said nothing at first. Her eyes settled on the envelope in my hands. "You've decided?" she asked. I nodded, gaze fixed on the coffee cup. No court fights, no shouting matches. "I just want to walk away without bowing my head," I said softly. Loretta took a sip of her hot tea, then murmured, "You don't have to fight. You just have to walk. But make sure you're holding the right map." I stayed quiet for a long time before I finally said, "I made one mistake already. Believing love would be enough. I won't make the same mistake twice." 20 minutes later, I walked into a red brick building in the town center, where a small sign read, "Flannery and Associates." The glass door opened, and I was led in to meet Rachel Flannery, the granddaughter of the lawyer I used to know. Rachel was younger than I'd expected, but her eyes were anything but inexperienced. She shook my hand with both of hers, warm and steady. I handed her the envelope, and she quickly pulled out the deed, laying it on the table. "I've never seen someone engrave their name like this. You're from a generation that honors its word," Rachel smiled. I nodded. "I'm not good at fighting, but I know how to hold on to what's mine." Rachel scanned the documents, then made a fresh printout. "This deed is fully valid. You are the sole legal owner. No co-signers, no transfers. And the laser engraving, it's rare. Makes forgery a lot harder." I exhaled slowly. All those years in that house, I'd never once mentioned this. I never needed them to know who I was. But now, I needed them to know I didn't need them anymore. Rachel tilted her head, waiting for more. I leaned back slightly, eyes drifting to the window where early frost traced streaks across the glass. "I don't want a legal battle," I said. "I just want to transfer things properly. I'll leave, but not empty-handed." Rachel nodded and asked, "Do you want to transfer ownership to someone?" I shook my head. "I want to sell my share, or at least formalize the rights. But I won't stay. I want them to know it wasn't them pushing me out. I chose to leave." Rachel smiled gently. "That's the strongest way to go, Ms. Celeste." We spent some time going over the next steps. She asked about bills tied to the house, utilities, insurance, banking. I asked her to stop every payment I was still making. Then I asked her to send Mason and Bevan a formal letter. No threats, no loud words, just a polite legal notice. "What should I write in the letter?" Rachel asked. I smiled faintly. "Just the truth. Tell them I no longer wish to share this living space. I'll be arranging to leave soon. And since I am the rightful owner, they should prepare for adjustments." Rachel nodded, then handed me a new envelope, my name printed clearly on the front. "I'll take care of the rest. You go start packing." I held the envelope, heavier than I'd expected, not from the papers inside, but from the decision it represented. I'd spent a lifetime giving myself away, but all it took was one letter to reclaim who I was. I didn't go home right after meeting Rachel. I walked toward the post office, across the small town square where an old clock still chimed on the hour. A few late-season red leaves clung to the park bench. A gust of wind sent scattered pages of newspaper tumbling across the pavement. I sat down, pulling my coat tighter. There was a strange feeling blooming in me. Not quite relief, but something like the moment you finally set down a heavy object after carrying it for far too long. An older woman passed by, walking a beagle. She paused, looked at me, and gave a soft nod. I nodded back. We didn't say a word, but I saw something in her eyes, a recognition. We belonged to the same group, women who had lived too long for others, now learning to live for themselves. I pulled out a small note from my wallet, a list of things to do before I leave. Not a packing list, a soul list. I added one more line. Visit the old house, just once. My old home sat on Oak Ridge Street, about a 20-minute drive away. I hadn't returned since selling it to help build Masons, but now I wanted to see it again, to remind myself that I once had a home, built with my own hands, before I gave everything away in blind sacrifice. I called a taxi. The driver was a young Dominican man, polite and soft-spoken. He didn't ask why an old woman wanted to visit a house that no longer belonged to her. When we arrived, I saw they'd repainted the exterior. The white fence was now brown wood, but the lilac bush in the corner yard still stood. I stepped out, stood still for a few minutes. I didn't try to go in, didn't ask permission. I just stood there, hands in my coat pockets, letting the wind blow through my hair. I remembered afternoons on that porch, reading textbooks to prep for my lessons. I remembered first snowfalls, Mason and I building snowmen with his father's old red scarf. That house had once been my life. Now, it was just a marker, a milestone. The place where I began, and the place where I learned. Even giving has its limits. I returned before sunset, and I knew, the next time I walk out of the house I live in now, I won't be coming back. "What the hell is this? Is this some kind of joke?" Bevan hissed, her voice sharp as a razor, as she slammed a thin envelope onto the wooden table. I could picture every familiar corner of the house, trembling slightly beneath that hiss. Snow still fell gently outside the window, soft white flakes resting on the wooden frame. The smell of stew lingered faintly in the kitchen. But something had changed. There was a hollowness in the house that Bevan hadn't noticed yet. The envelope wasn't thick, just a single folded sheet. No return name, only the insignia of a law office in the upper corner. The address was printed neatly. Inside was a brief, formal notice, a warning that the legal owner of the property would begin proceedings to reclaim it within 45 days. No threats, no arguments, just a cold truth. They had never truly owned the house they thought was theirs. Mason stood beside her, holding a steaming cup of coffee he hadn't sipped. His neck was flushed red from the cold, his eyes dazed, like he'd just awakened from a long dream. "Do you think she actually did this?" he asked, voice dry. Bevan spun around, eyes blazing. "Who else could it be? Who else but her?" She snatched up the letter again, rereading it as if searching for some loophole, some detail that proved it was a hoax. But there was none. The language was clear, legal, final. Rachel Flannery's law office. Bevan repeated the name like a curse, then threw the letter back down. "She hired a lawyer, Mason. Your mother hired a lawyer to kick us out of the house." Mason closed his eyes. For the first time, every sound in the house seemed to vanish into thin air. No footsteps padding down the hallway, no clink of a spoon in ceramic as she brewed cinnamon apple tea, no scent of baked goods, no soft voice in a turtleneck sweater, humming as she tidied the living room. Just an empty house. He looked around, as if searching for his mother's presence, on the slanted picture frame on the shelf, or the hand towel that usually hung over the armrest. But everything was too tidy, too still, too foreign. "Where did she go?" he asked, the question landing in the kitchen like a stone dropped in water. Bevan crossed her arms. "If she thinks she's won, she's wrong. She might have the paperwork. But I have friends on the town council. We'll fight this." But she said it more like a self-soothing mantra than an actual plan. Neither of them noticed when Loretta appeared in the doorway. The door had been unlocked. Her white hair was dusted with snow, her hands gripping a brown cloth bag. "Hello, children," Loretta said, calm and steady as stone. "Your mother asked me to return something." Bevan turned sharply. "You know where she is, don't you?" "No," Loretta replied, eyes clear and cold. "And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Mason stepped toward her. "Loretta, please. I don't understand what's happening." Loretta didn't answer right away. She placed the bag on the table, unzipped it, and pulled out a delicate ivory silk wrap. Inside was a small porcelain teapot, its gold trim worn thin, the same one Bevan had once called a cluttered old relic. "She asked me to hold on to this, said she wanted to bring it when she moved, then changed her mind. Told me, keep it. Anywhere there's tea, that's home." Bevan scoffed. "A teapot? That's all? She left? Just like that? No goodbye?" Loretta shook her head. "Some things don't need to be said. Celeste once told me she wasn't waiting for you to see her. She was waiting for herself, to be brave enough to leave." Bevan's fists clenched. So this was all planned? Living here, eating with us, pretending to be kind, just to stab us in the back? Loretta didn't flinch. She pulled up a chair near the fireplace, brushed the snow from her gray sweater. "Not everyone who stays quiet is pretending."
she said slowly. Celeste talked about this 5 years ago. Back when Bevan first moved in, Mason's face froze. Since then? But she never said anything to me. She knew you wouldn't take her side, Loretta replied softly, without judgment. She said, my son is a good man. He's just too afraid to disappoint people. Bevan opened her mouth to argue, but Loretta met her gaze, not with anger, not with shame, but like a mirror, showing her own reflection. You don't have to love your mother-in-law, but there are things, if you don't respect them, you'll regret it later.
Mason walked to the kitchen cabinet, to the drawer where his mother always kept her tea. The familiar tin was gone. In its place, a small folded note rested in the corner. He opened it. The handwriting was soft, slanted. Thank you for holding the house for me all this time. Mason stood still. Every sound faded, as if the entire room had been drawn into the paper's quiet weight. Bevan grabbed the note, read it once, then tossed it back on the table. She's crazy. No, Loretta said, her voice calm and certain. She's clearer than anyone I know. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every object, the carnation painting, the incomplete set of glassware, the faded rug, seemed to lose its spirit, because the woman who gave them life was gone. Mason climbed the stairs. His mother's room was empty. The bed made neatly, sheets fresh, no indentation on the mattress edge. By the window, the lace curtain swayed gently in the breeze. The old photo of his grandfather had been taken down. On the vanity, no comb, no lavender hand cream, just a worn pillow embroidered with fading words. Home is not a place. It's a feeling. Back downstairs, Loretta stood, adjusting her collar. Where is she now? Mason asked. Barely above a whisper. Loretta paused, then shook her head. Celeste doesn't want you to know. She needs time, space, a world where she's not treated like a guest in the house she helped build. Bevan folded her arms and turned away. But something in her eyes had changed. Less anger, more uncertainty. Loretta moved to the door, then turned back one last time. Her voice firm but gentle. That woman gave almost everything she had. Don't wait until she's truly gone to start counting the words you never said. The door closed behind her. Snow continued to fall outside. And inside that house, there was no one to brew tea. No soft voice asking if Mason had eaten. No rustle of pages turning late at night. Only silence remained. Mason stood in the kitchen, eyes fixed on an old, chipped mug, still sitting on the upper shelf. The one his mother always used, despite Bevan's complaints that it was junk. He reached up, took it down, and for the first time in years, felt like he'd truly lost something. That afternoon, Mason returned to his home office, where Celeste used to leave a quiet cup of tea by the desk, never saying a word. The desk was as tidy as always, but the family photo, the oak frame Celeste had bought at the town fair in 2010, was gone. He searched around, opened drawers, lifted files, nothing, except, in the corner of the bottom drawer, a small handwritten note. Don't wait until you no longer hear your mother's footsteps to realize how empty the floors have become. Mason sighed, leaning back into the chair. For a fleeting moment, he remembered the day his mother cried because she couldn't find her old wedding ring. It had slipped between the couch cushions. That day, he'd snapped, "It's just a ring, Mom. I'll buy you another." Now, he understood. Some things can't be replaced. Like presents, like warmth, like a mother's trust, when she begins to see her son turning into a stranger. In the kitchen, Bevan paced, phone in hand. She muttered nonsense. There's gotta be a way. We can't let her do this. But she didn't even know who to call. A lawyer? The police? Her parents? No one could answer the biggest question echoing in her mind. Why would she leave like that? With no warning, no arguments, no accusations. Just a letter. Cold, legal, deliberate. Bevan sat down, eyes drifting to the window. Snow still fell, soft, but endless. She had never thought Celeste would leave. To her, Celeste was the type who endured. who stayed quiet, who never had the courage. She was wrong. And Loretta, the only one who could explain, was already gone. Disappeared behind the gray wooden door, never looked back. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was old Mr. Percy, the town postman. "Forwarded mail," he said, handing over a brown envelope marked in red. "Forward to new address. Confidential request." Mason took it, nodded silently. Mr. Percy turned to leave. But just before he reached the gate, he murmured, almost to himself, "Women like Celeste. They don't just walk away. They simply choose where they truly belong." "If Mom wanted to leave, why didn't she say anything?" Mason asked. But only the sound of waves replied. "The small apartment sat near the old docks, the favorite spot of my late husband. He used to go there every morning, catching the occasional fish, not for the catch, but for the excuse to sit still for hours, listening to the waves lap against the pier. I never understood that patience in my younger days, but now I do. Sometimes, silence is the last grace left for a weary soul." I sat at a simple wooden table, steam curling up from a cup of peppermint tea. Pale sunlight streamed through the tiny window. This new place was smaller than anywhere I'd ever lived. No dishwasher, no washing machine. But I felt lighter, like every square foot, without clutter, gave my mind room to breathe. The phone rang. Bevan's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer right away. I poured more hot water into the teapot, inhaled the scent of mint and apple. When I finally picked up, the voice on the other end burst forth. "I don't understand what you're thinking. You think this is right? Turning the house upside down, then running off like some spoiled child?" I didn't respond right away. The room was so quiet. I could hear the clock ticking. Then I spoke, my voice calm. "You've never called me Mom. No need to start now." Bevan fell silent. I heard her breathing quicken. Then the line clicked. She had hung up. I set the phone down and leaned gently into the chair. Not angry, not sad, just something new, like standing up for the first time without needing someone to hold me. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and found Mason standing there, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. He wore the charcoal gray wool coat I'd knitted him in the winter of 2007, thick and warm. Back then, I'd thought, he'll be warm no matter how cold the world gets. Maybe I was wrong. "You really live here?" Mason looked around the modest space, his eyes unsure. I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. "Bevan called me. I was surprised, but you shouldn't have left without saying something." I poured him a cup of tea before replying softly, "You always knew. You just didn't want to believe it." Mason looked up at me for a long time. Then he nodded. No argument, no excuses, just a small nod, but something inside him crumbled with it. We sat side by side, each holding a cup. No more words, but the silence this time was different. Not heavy, just an understanding. Some things are beyond speaking, because they're already too late. Outside the window, seagulls circled low. The wind from the sea carried the smell of salt and chill. I placed my hand on the rough wooden table, so different from the cold glass surface in the old house. Mason reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in a worn floral handkerchief, the one that had sat on my vanity for years. He placed it on the table without a word. I unfolded it. Inside was a small, old brooch, the kind I used to wear in winter to pin my scarf. One leg was broken. I thought it had been lost long ago. "You dropped it when I was 10, Mason said. "You didn't notice. You were carrying me, rushing to the hospital because I had a fever." I touched the brooch, like touching a memory that had lain quiet too long. "I kept it because I knew you'd never ask for it back, just like you never asked for anything back from me." I looked up at Mason. The same eyes that once feared needles, that once hid under the blanket during storms, were now the eyes of a man, one who had learned how to avoid, to endure, and now to quietly regret. "I didn't come here to ask you to come back," Mason said. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now." I gave a small nod. and gently touched the handkerchief. I'm still here, but not for anyone to keep. Mason lowered his head. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. Shame, maybe, or loss. But I wasn't here to rehash old wrongs or grant forgiveness. I was here to bear witness to myself, that I had stepped out of my own shadow for the first time in my life. After Mason left, I received an envelope from Emily, the young attorney. Inside was a notarized copy of the house deed, along with a small note. You left at the right time. If you need anything, I'll always be here. I tucked the letter into a small wooden box beside my bed. Then I made myself another pot of tea. This time, I chose the chamomile blend I'd saved since last autumn, but had never brewed. Not because I didn't have time, but because I'd never allowed myself to believe I deserved a quiet afternoon like this. Mason had been gone for a while, but I still hadn't turned on the lights. The darkness in the apartment didn't frighten me anymore. On the contrary, it gave me stillness, as if the whole world had hushed so I could finally breathe in rhythm with myself. I brewed another pot of decaf and sat by the window. Outside, the dock was lit by a soft strip of yellow lights, reflecting on the still water. Christmas was approaching, and for the first time in years, I wasn't caught in the whirl of gift lists, baking, cleaning, and decorating late into the night. I didn't send out cards. No one expected them from me, and I didn't feel the need to remind anyone that I still existed. My absence was reminder enough. Sometimes, those who leave aren't weak. They've just lived too long in other people's noise, and finally, need a silence of their own. Loretta visited the next afternoon, bringing a bag of roasted chestnuts and an old book wrapped in newspaper. I saw this in a used bookstore and thought of you, she said. To the lighthouse. The cover was frayed, the pages yellowed, but it still held the scent of old ink. I ran my fingers over the title. Didn't read. Just felt the calm settle. You really are okay, Loretta said as we sipped tea together. I'm not sure I'm okay, I replied. But I'm not angry anymore, she nodded. Anger tires us. Letting go is lighter. We sat in silence. Sometimes you don't need someone to fix you or even console you, just someone quiet enough not to rush you into pretending you're fine. After Loretta left, I opened an old tin box, now just a keepsake. I used it to hold photographs, wedding pictures, Mason at age 4, me and Loretta in our school uniforms. I sorted through them, not to admire, but to see if I was ready to move on without needing to hold on. A gust of winter wind slipped through the window crack. I shivered, stood up, drew the curtains closed, and quietly lit a small candle. The flame was soft, dim, not bright, not showy, but enough to warm this room and warm me. That house doesn't need me anymore, but I still need myself. I whispered those words as I pushed open the glass door of the apartment, letting in the scent of Christmas morning snow. Outside, the small park by the harbor lay blanketed in white, silent, as if holding on to a secret even the wind didn't dare reveal. A chill crept into my collar, but it didn't make me shiver. Instead, I felt oddly at peace, as if I'd finally repaid a long-standing debt to myself. I brewed a pot of black tea, added a sliver of orange peel, and sat down in the velvet-upholstered chair by the window. The old handkerchief Mason had brought still lay on the table, beside the tin box holding unanswered letters. I wasn't in a hurry. When my husband was alive, he once said, "Some things aren't meant to be understood right away. What matters is that you understand and choose to hold on." The red maple tree in the park, the one he planted when we first moved to Brunswick, still stood tall, sturdy in the snow. I've always believed that even if no one sees it, some things still hold value. A soft knock on the door. I opened it to find Loretta, wrapped in a thick scarf, arms full of waffle cookies. "I knew you'd be up early," she smiled, her eyes bright in the frosty morning. "And I knew you'd need a little sweetness today." We sat by the window, sharing the cookies without much talk. Loretta laid down a photograph. 2 young girls with curly hair standing on a wooden porch, lemonade in hand. Us, more than 50 years ago. "Remember this day?" she asked. I nodded. The day we canceled our first dance class because the power went out. Yeah, and then laughed ourselves silly in the dark because the cassette player still ran on batteries. Loretta chuckled, then softened. Celeste, I know today isn't easy, but you did the right thing. I didn't reply. I simply opened a drawer and took out a letter from the town library board, thanking me for funding a scholarship in my husband's name. It had gone to a first-year student majoring in education. I didn't know the girl, but I smiled at the line. Thank you, Mrs. Celeste, for believing in young people and in education. I hadn't disappeared. I had simply shifted into another shape, another space where I still mattered. Loretta stood, brushing snow from her sleeves. Let's go. I want to visit his maple tree. We walked out, each holding a paper cup, steam curling above the snow. The park was quiet, save for the sound of our footsteps and distant waves from the harbor. The maple tree now towered above us, its bare branches heavy with snow. At its base, I placed a small candle lantern, its soft yellow glow flickering, fragile but warm. I didn't pray. I didn't speak aloud. I simply whispered, I haven't disappeared. I've just bloomed. A little later, Loretta stood beside me in silence, then said gently, I used to worry you'd stay another 10 years, just enduring. But you know, sometimes walking away is an act of love. I looked at her. I think I've been waiting for someone to tell me that. We returned to the apartment as the sun climbed higher. On the steps, a single envelope sat neatly in the mailbox. I recognized Mason's handwriting instantly. No return address, just one line. If you'll allow it, I'd like to bring Emma to visit you. I carried the letter to the kitchen, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the tin box, beside the handkerchief, beside the letter from the young student. Small things, but real. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because, for the first time, I wanted to choose my moment to speak. Not out of urgency, not to please anyone. The day wore on. Pale winter light stretched long across the wooden floor. I made another pot of tea, this time without sugar, without orange peel, just plain black tea. A little bitter, but true. Loretta returned in the late afternoon. She brought a small wooden sculpture, a woman with her arms reaching skyward. I thought you might need this in your new home, she said, placing it on the windowsill. I looked at it, not polished, just a rough piece of carved wood, but the raised arms held life. I'd never thought of decorating the apartment. For me, stillness and space were a kind of freedom, but I nodded. Thank you. Do you regret it? Loretta asked after a quiet moment. I didn't answer right away. I walked to the window, looked out at the maple tree still standing in the snow. Then I turned back and shook my head. I just wish I had done it sooner. Loretta nodded. No surprise. No follow-up. She understood. And maybe in this life, nothing is more precious than a friend who understands you without needing the explanation. That night, I turned off all the lights, except for the single candle, glowing faintly in a hanging lantern by the door. I sat at the table and opened a small notebook I hadn't used in a long time. Not for journaling, but to write down a short list. I left. I didn't disappear. I'm still here. For myself. Then I closed the notebook and exhaled. This Christmas, there was no tree, no gifts, no blaring music, but something inside me had changed, quietly but deeply, as if, after years of being overlooked, of being pushed aside, I had finally walked myself back to the center. Not the center of someone's house, not the center of someone else's world, but the center of me. I left that house on a snowy morning. No one saw me off. No one called me back. But I didn't feel alone, because for the first time in years, I wasn't leaving to please anyone. I was leaving to protect the last bit of self-respect I still had. People may forget the meals you cooked, the advice you gave, but they will remember the day you walked away and never looked back. Have you ever asked yourself, What does family really mean if it only exists when you stay silent? If you're sitting quietly in your own home, remember, you don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, just standing up is enough.